The tension builds. The metallic clang of heavy doors echoed through the dark, cold prison chamber. Alien lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the stone floor. The air was thick with tension. In the center of the room, a human mechanic stood, hands bound to a cold iron chair, his face bruised but defiant. His name was Ethan, a simple mechanic from Earth, but in the eyes of the aliens, he was something much more dangerous. The alien general, a towering figure with dark, reptilian skin, walked slowly toward him. His eyes glowed with a fierce intensity. "You have a name, human," the general growled, his voice low and threatening. Ethan didn't flinch. His eyes, though weary, remained unwavering. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The general didn't expect an answer. The silence hung between them, a silent battle of wills. "You've been a thorn in our side for far too long," the alien continued, pacing in front of him. "You humans think you're so clever. You've taken down entire fleets with nothing but your crude weapons and unpredictable tactics. Tell me, why should I let you live? Why should I not just end your pathetic existence right here?" Ethan still said nothing. He was calculating. He had already been in tight situations before. There was a plan in his head. A way out. The aliens didn't know it yet, but they had made a grave mistake by capturing him. What they didn't realize was that human mechanics weren't just good at fixing machines. They were good at breaking them too. The general stopped pacing and crouched down to look directly into Ethan's eyes. "You have no idea what you're up against, do you? You are nothing more than a tool to us. You will fix our machines, and if you do not comply, we will make you. We have methods. We have time. And we will break you." Ethan's lips curled into a slight defiant smile. He wasn't afraid. The more the alien threatened him, the more it seemed like they were the ones who should be afraid. Humans had something that no other species in the galaxy could understand: resilience. And resilience was something that couldn't be broken by threats or pain. The general's patience was starting to wear thin. "You humans always think you're so clever," he spat. "Your kind believes you can fight us, resist us, like you've done with every race you've ever encountered. But you will not win this time. We are far beyond your primitive technology." Ethan leaned back in the chair, his arms straining against the cold metal restraints. He had 1,000 ideas running through his head, each one more daring than the last. The general's words were just noise now. Ethan knew the truth. The aliens didn't understand humans. They didn't understand how resourceful, how dangerous a single human could be when pushed to the edge. "I've been in worse places than this," Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm, controlled, and surprisingly strong. "And I've always found a way out." The general's eyes narrowed, sensing the underlying challenge in Ethan's tone. "You think your words will save you?" He sneered. "You are nothing more than a prisoner. I've seen humans like you before, and we always break them." Ethan remained silent, his mind racing. He wasn't worried about breaking. He had seen too many of his comrades give in to fear. But not him. He knew that as long as his mind stayed sharp, as long as he could think, he could turn any situation around. The general stepped back, gesturing to the 2 soldiers standing by the door. "Take him to the workshop," he ordered. "Show him the machines we need fixed. Let's see how long your resolve lasts when you're faced with a challenge you can't escape." The 2 alien guards moved swiftly, grabbing Ethan by the arms and hauling him to his feet. His legs were weak from the hours of being restrained, but he didn't give them the satisfaction of showing it. He walked with them, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of opportunity. He could already hear the distant hum of the alien machinery, and in that moment, he knew something important. They had made a mistake. The alien workshop was a vast, sterile room filled with enormous machines and blinking lights. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Massive alien war machines stood in the center, their complex designs clearly far beyond anything humanity had ever created. The room smelled of oil and machinery, but beneath it all, There was a faint, sharp scent of fear. Ethan was shoved into the center of the room. The guards stood at attention, their weapons trained on him. The general's voice echoed through the room as he entered, standing behind a control panel. "These are the machines you will fix," the general said, pointing to the colossal war machines. "Fix them, or we will take your life. There is no escape." But Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the machines. His eyes were focused on something else entirely. The wires, the power conduits, the small openings in the walls where maintenance access could be found. In his mind, the plan was already forming. The general continued speaking, but Ethan wasn't listening. His mind was elsewhere, already calculating how to turn the tide in his favor. The aliens had no idea what they had just unleashed. Human mechanics weren't just good at fixing things, they were good at breaking them too. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had one chance. He had to use everything he had learned, every trick he had picked up during his time on Earth, to survive. Because if he didn't, this would be the last day he would ever draw breath. The tension in the air thickened, but Ethan was calm. He was ready. The game had only just begun. The bold defiance of the human mechanic. The hum of the alien machines was a constant reminder of the danger Ethan faced. But for him, it was more of a challenge. His mind was already racing through hundreds of scenarios, analyzing every detail, every weakness he could exploit. The guards stood motionless, eyes fixed on him, but Ethan knew that his real opponent wasn't them. It was the alien general. The general's arrogance and overconfidence would be his downfall, just like every tyrant before him. Ethan took a deep breath, shifting slightly in his chair. The restraints on his arms were tight, but not unbreakable. He had already tested their limits. Every moment, every second that passed, was an opportunity. The general might have believed he had the upper hand, but he hadn't considered the human spirit, the will to survive and fight back. Ethan didn't just want to escape, he wanted to send a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity could not be contained. "You really think you can hold me here?" Ethan spoke up again, his voice steady and calm. The general's eyes flickered toward him, clearly irritated, but Ethan could see the momentary crack in his confidence. "That's all I need," he thought. A moment of doubt. The general's eyes narrowed. "Your fate is in my hands, human. You have no power here. You are weak, a tool for us to use. And tools do not speak." Ethan laughed softly, a dry, cynical chuckle. The sound was almost mocking in the silence of the room. The alien guards shifted uncomfortably, sensing something was off. Ethan's defiance was more than just words. It was a challenge. He was baiting the general, hoping to make him slip up. And it worked. "You've underestimated me, alien," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'm no tool. I'm a mechanic. I fix things, I break things, and I'm really good at both. You should have learned that before you made your move." The general's eyes flared with anger, but there was something else too, concern. The mechanic was not afraid. That alone was dangerous. The general had been too used to breaking others, too used to seeing fear in their eyes. This was new, and it unsettled him. He stepped closer, his face inches from Ethan's. "Fix these machines," he ordered, his voice low and venomous, "or you will regret it. Your kind is fragile. You will break before long." Ethan looked him in the eye, refusing to show fear. "You're not listening. You've captured a mechanic. A human mechanic." His words were deliberate, slow. "I don't work for you. I work for myself. And right now, I'm working on getting out of here." The general's hand twitched, as though considering whether to strike Ethan down right there. But before he could make a decision, the doors to the workshop slid open, revealing a new arrival. Another alien, a different species with sharp features and gleaming armor, stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room. They looked at Ethan, then at the general. "Have you secured the human?" the new alien asked, its voice deep and formal. The general hesitated for a moment. Ethan saw the shift in the alien's posture, the brief moment where the general's authority wavered in front of a higher-ranked officer. That's it. Ethan's mind raced. The general was rattled. The power dynamic was shifting. Yes, the general said quickly, trying to regain control. He will be useful once he cooperates. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his mind already plotting his next move. Cooperate? That was never part of the plan. The new alien officer looked down at Ethan. What is your plan, human? The officer's tone was cold, calculating. Do you really think you can escape? There is no one to help you. You are alone. Ethan smiled, the flicker of a plan beginning to form in his mind. That's where you're wrong, he said, his voice suddenly calm and confident. I'm never alone. I always have a plan. He glanced at the machines again. The alien technology was formidable, but it wasn't invincible. Humans might not have the advanced alien weapons, but they had something far more powerful: ingenuity. And Ethan had spent years learning how to fix things, learning how to tear them apart when the need arose. He flexed his hands, subtly testing the restraints once more. There was a small gap between the metal and the chair, a gap that might be just wide enough to allow him to slip free. His fingers twitched, but he held back. He needed to wait for the right moment, and the moment would come. The alien officer turned to the general, and in that brief exchange, Ethan saw his chance. The guards had lowered their vigilance, distracted by the sudden appearance of the new officer. This was it, the opportunity he had been waiting for. With a sudden burst of movement, Ethan slammed his shoulder against the chair. The metal frame creaked under the force, but it held. The general and the officer were momentarily distracted, but Ethan didn't need long. He twisted his body, his bound arms scraping against the chair's armrests as he used the moment of confusion to slip one hand free. The alien officers didn't notice at first. Ethan's heartbeat quickened, but he stayed focused. He wasn't just escaping, he was sending a message. The aliens were right to fear humanity, and soon they would learn why. The handcuffs fell to the floor with a soft clang, unnoticed by the distracted guards. Ethan stood, slowly and methodically, his eyes locked with the general's, and he saw the moment the alien realized that things had changed. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Ethan said, his voice now full of quiet power. You made a mistake, and I'm going to make sure you regret it. The tension in the room became palpable as the general's face hardened. The game had just begun. The alien leader's plan revealed. The room was silent for a moment, as if the very air itself had been held captive by Ethan's sudden defiance. The alien general stood motionless, his reptilian eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of the shift in control. But Ethan wasn't waiting for him to recover. The general's carefully constructed facade of power was crumbling, and the mechanic was right there to see it. You're far too bold for your own good, human, the general hissed, taking a step forward, his large form towering over Ethan. I'll make you regret this. Ethan didn't back down. He had already slipped his restraints and had made it clear that he wasn't intimidated by the alien's threats. The power was shifting in his favor, and now the game had taken a new turn. You're not the one who should be worried, Ethan replied, his voice calm but loaded with purpose. You're playing a dangerous game, one that you don't understand. But I do, and I'm going to make sure you realize just how badly you've underestimated humanity. The general's nostrils flared, his anger simmering just below the surface. But something in Ethan's words made the alien pause, his calculating mind spinning. What could this human possibly know? His soldiers had always been able to crush resistance, and yet here was a single human who had already escaped their custody once. The alien general, trying to regain some of his lost confidence, motioned for his soldiers to step aside. With a sharp click, a large holographic display flared to life in the center of the room. The image it projected was a massive, sleek warship. Its angular design was alien to Ethan, with weapons systems that could obliterate entire fleets with ease. You still think you're clever, do you? The general sneered, his voice now taking on a mocking tone. "This is the vessel you will repair. The Apocalypse-class dreadnought. It's the most advanced ship in the galaxy. And you, human, are going to fix it for us." Ethan didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto the hologram, scanning the intricate design of the ship. He could see it now. It was a ship of mass destruction, a weapon capable of bringing entire civilizations to their knees. The general was right about one thing. The ship was advanced. But there was something the alien leader hadn't considered. "You think I'll help you fix it?" Ethan asked, his voice gaining strength. "You think you can just make me repair your weapon of destruction and not pay the price? I'm not a slave, and I'm certainly not a tool. You're making a huge mistake, General. You've just created your worst enemy." The general's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You will fix it, or you will die," he growled, his patience nearing its breaking point. But Ethan stood tall, his expression unwavering. "You're wrong. If you think I'm just some mechanic, you've missed the point entirely. You've made the mistake of thinking you can control me. But I'll show you what happens when you underestimate a human." Ethan took a step closer to the holographic display. His mind was already racing. The ship might have been an impressive piece of technology, but every machine had weaknesses. And humans, we were the masters at finding them. What the general didn't realize was that the true power of humanity wasn't in brute force or raw strength. It was in the ability to adapt, to learn, and to break through even the toughest barriers. The general seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. His soldiers, who had been so sure of their control, were starting to shift uncomfortably. They could feel the change as well. "You can fix it, or you can die trying," the general said again, his tone no longer as certain as before. Ethan turned his gaze toward the alien leader, his voice soft but full of conviction. "You think I'll just fall in line because you say so? That's your first mistake. I'm not here to fix your weapon. I'm here to turn it against you." The words hung in the air for a long, tense moment. The general's eyes burned with fury. The soldiers' fingers twitched around their weapons. But it was Ethan's words that had struck a nerve. "You see," Ethan continued, stepping back and pacing slightly, "the more you keep me here, the more you imprison me, the more you give me time to figure out your systems. I'm not fixing this ship for you. No, I'm finding a way to break it. I'll destroy your weapon, and you won't even see it coming." The general looked at Ethan in disbelief. Was the human mechanic really serious? His hand tightened around the control panel, his claws clicking against the surface as his mind raced. The human was right. If Ethan had the time and knowledge of their technology, he could turn the tide in the most unexpected ways. "You believe you can defeat us." The general's voice was low, cold, and dangerous. "You think one man, one human, can stand against the might of an entire galaxy." Ethan met the alien's gaze. "I don't just stand against you. I'll make sure your own creation turns on you. You made a fatal mistake when you thought you could break us. Humans don't break. We adapt. We fight. And in the end, we always win." The general's jaw tightened, his mind racing as he processed Ethan's words. What if the mechanic wasn't bluffing? What if humanity really had the capacity to outwit them at every turn? The mere thought unsettled him more than anything else. And that uncertainty, that crack in his confidence, was the first real sign of weakness the general had shown. "You'll regret this," the general finally muttered, his eyes burning with rage. "We'll see who wins, human. But mark my words, you'll never leave this ship alive." Ethan simply smiled. "We'll see, won't we?" As the general stormed out of the room, his soldiers trailing behind, Ethan remained standing, staring at the holographic display. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. The odds were stacked against him, but the general had made a fatal error. He had underestimated the one thing that had never failed humanity: ingenuity. And now it was Ethan's turn to prove it. A break in the silence. The silence in the workshop was deafening. The hum of alien technology filled the air, and Ethan stood alone in the center of the room, eyes fixed on the holographic display of the Apocalypse-class dreadnought. The tension from the earlier confrontation still hung in the air, thick and heavy. The general's warning echoed in his mind, but Ethan's resolve remained unshaken. The alien had threatened him, but in doing so, he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated Ethan's ability to think beyond what they could fathom. The doors slid shut behind him with a soft thud. Ethan stood motionless for a moment, listening as the sound of alien footsteps faded down the hallway. He was alone. And in that moment, he knew this was his chance. He wasn't just going to fix the ship. No, that would be far too easy. Ethan had another plan in mind. He was going to break it, just like he had promised. But to do that, he had to understand it, learn its weaknesses, and gain control of its systems. And the first step was to make sure the aliens couldn't see him coming. Ethan's fingers brushed the edge of the control panel, his mind working quickly. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a problem solver, a survivor. And the Apocalypse-class dreadnought had a weakness, a key vulnerability that even the most advanced alien tech couldn't hide. Every machine, no matter how powerful, had one. But first, he needed to buy himself time. Time to learn the ship's inner workings without drawing attention. Ethan made his way over to a nearby console, pretending to examine it as though it were a standard repair job. His eyes flicked back to the door. Where were the guards? Moments later, 2 alien soldiers entered the room, their weapons slung across their backs. They didn't speak, their presence cold and oppressive as they stood silently in the corner. They were watching him, waiting for him to make his move. But Ethan was prepared. His hands, though trembling slightly from the adrenaline, remained steady. He knew they were expecting him to break, to show fear, but they wouldn't get that satisfaction. He focused on the panel in front of him, his fingers running across the alien controls. He didn't know their exact function, but he didn't need to. He had learned enough from his time working with machines back on Earth to know how to reverse engineer just about anything. The trick was to look for patterns, signs of input, and weaknesses in the system. As he worked, he couldn't help but reflect on his earlier words to the general. "We don't break." He'd said it with confidence, but the truth was that even the strongest minds could be pushed to their limits. The aliens had come for humanity with the assumption that they could overpower them, control them. But Ethan knew the truth. They had no idea who they were truly dealing with. The more they tried to break him, the more dangerous they made him. His fingers brushed across a series of glowing buttons. He pressed one. A soft click echoed in the room as the system reacted. The lights above flickered momentarily before returning to their usual glow. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It worked. He quickly moved on to another part of the console, accessing the ship's power grid. He couldn't disable the systems just yet, but he could delay them. He could cause enough disruption to slow down the aliens' progress. Just a little interference here, a bit of misdirection there. The more time he bought, the better his chances of escaping. If not now, then later. The soldiers didn't notice. They continued to stand at attention, their eyes never leaving him. Ethan's pulse quickened, but he didn't let it show. He focused. Every moment was precious. Then one of the guards spoke. His voice was deep and gravelly, an accent foreign to Ethan's ears. "You think you can escape, don't you?" The soldier's tone was mocking, almost condescending. "The general's patience is growing thin. He will not be so lenient next time." Ethan turned slightly, locking eyes with the soldier. This was his moment. "I don't need the general's patience," he said quietly. "I need the ship's systems to fail. And that's something I know how to do." The soldier sneered, clearly not understanding the implication of Ethan's words. "You're delusional. We control everything here. You're nothing more than a broken tool." The soldier laughed, but it was a hollow laugh, and Ethan could hear the edge of uncertainty beneath it. He smiled. That's it. The cracks in the alien's confidence were starting to show. The more they tried to intimidate him, the more he understood that they were afraid. afraid of what he might do. As the soldier turned away, distracted by something in the hallway, Ethan pressed another series of buttons, his fingers flying over the console. He had to hurry. Time was running out. Then there it was. A soft beep. The ship's systems were beginning to respond. Small, seemingly insignificant changes in the flow of energy, the recalibration of minor equipment. But those small changes were adding up. The Apocalypse-class dreadnought was starting to show signs of instability. Ethan's heart raced. This was it, the beginning of the end for the aliens' grand plans. He wasn't just breaking free, he was fighting back. But he couldn't stop now. The next phase of his plan was more dangerous, more daring, and if he wasn't careful, it would be his last mistake. Ethan took a deep breath, stepping away from the console and turning back toward the soldiers. He knew what he had to do. The next step would push him even closer to his goal, but it would also put him in direct conflict with the alien forces. He had to act quickly. Every move counted now. He needed to make sure the ship's systems would be vulnerable. He needed to outwit them all. And he would. Because for humans, survival wasn't just a fight. It was an art. Human ingenuity strikes back. The atmosphere in the workshop had shifted again, this time with a newfound sense of urgency. Ethan stood, his fingers still lingering on the alien console, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made progress. The ship's systems were showing small signs of instability, the first cracks in the aliens' overwhelming superiority. The tension in the room was palpable, the sound of his own breath filling the silence as he calculated his next move. The soldiers, still standing by the door, hadn't noticed the subtle changes he'd made. They were more concerned with their own orders, more focused on keeping an eye on him than anything else. But Ethan wasn't fooled. He knew that his time was limited. The general would soon return, and with him, a new wave of pressure. He needed to act fast. Ethan glanced around the room, scanning for anything that could give him the edge. His eyes fell on the war machines, giant, hulking mechanical monsters in the center of the room, seemingly indestructible with their thick armor and advanced weaponry. These were the ships the aliens had relied on for centuries, the cornerstone of their empire. But even the most invincible machines had weaknesses. And humans were experts at finding those weaknesses. Ethan's mind raced, sifting through the ship's schematics he'd glimpsed on the holographic display earlier. He'd already started the process of sabotaging the ship's internal systems, but the real danger lay in its weapons, specifically the energy reactors that powered the dreadnought's massive cannons. If he could cause a disruption there, even a small one, the whole ship could fall apart. But first, he needed to find a way to access the reactor. Ethan took a deep breath and turned toward the soldier standing by the door, who had his back to him, unaware of Ethan's intentions. It was time to make a move. With swift, quiet steps, Ethan moved toward the guard, his body moving fluidly, almost like a shadow. He could hear the sound of the soldiers' footsteps, the slight rustling of their uniform, but there was a strange rhythm to their movements, a pattern he could exploit. In one fluid motion, Ethan reached the guard, his hand darting out and grabbing the alien's weapon. He twisted it from the soldier's grip with practiced ease. The soldier barely had time to react before Ethan pulled the trigger, firing a single shot that disabled the soldier's control unit. The alien collapsed to the ground, momentarily stunned. The second soldier turned, shocked by the sudden movement. Ethan didn't hesitate. His hand shot out, and in one swift motion, he knocked the weapon from the soldier's hand and pinned them against the wall. The alien struggled, but Ethan was too quick. He used the soldier's own momentum to throw them to the ground, knocking the breath out of them. For a brief moment, the room was silent again. Ethan stood, chest heaving, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just done. He hadn't just disabled the soldiers, he'd taken control of their weapons. The tables had turned. Now he had a chance to make the real move, the real strike back against the alien forces. Ethan wasn't just going to escape, he was going to take their power away. He quickly retrieved the data pad from the fallen soldier's belt and accessed the communication system. His eyes flicked over the screen, quickly scanning for anything that could give him an edge. His fingers danced across the interface, entering the override codes that he had learned earlier. The soldiers hadn't realized it yet, but their communication systems were already compromised. Ethan had introduced a small virus into the network, a virus that would block their signals, scramble their communications, and give him the upper hand. As the screen blinked, showing the success of the virus upload, Ethan smiled. It was working. Now, with the comm systems down, he could move freely without worrying about reinforcements or being tracked. The soldiers were out of commission, and the general was far away. Ethan still had a window of opportunity, and he needed to seize it. He turned back toward the control panel, his mind now fixed on the next phase of his plan. The reactor, the heart of the Apocalypse-class dreadnought, the one thing that could destroy the entire ship, and possibly the entire alien fleet. He moved toward the door that led deeper into the ship, checking the corridor for any signs of movement. The halls were eerily quiet, and the low hum of the ship's systems seemed to echo, amplifying the sense of isolation. But Ethan wasn't afraid. He was a mechanic, and mechanics didn't fear machines. They learned from them. They adapted. They found the way through. The corridors twisted and turned, leading him to a section of the ship that appeared to be heavily guarded. Several alien soldiers were patrolling the area, and the large metal door to the reactor core was locked tight, guarded by multiple layers of security. Ethan approached the door carefully, his mind working quickly. There were security cameras overhead, scanning the hallway. If he triggered them, the whole base would be alerted. There was no turning back. He crouched, carefully making his way to a nearby ventilation shaft. It was a long shot, but it was his only option. The shaft was narrow, barely big enough for him to squeeze through. But Ethan didn't hesitate. He crawled through the tight space, listening carefully for any sounds that could indicate movement from the soldiers outside. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan emerged into a small maintenance room, hidden behind a locked security door. From there, it was a short distance to the reactor. The reactor was massive, its core pulsating with intense energy. The entire room buzzed with power, and Ethan could feel the heat radiating off the machinery. He stepped closer, careful not to make any noise, his mind already racing through the plan he had formulated. He reached the control panel and immediately began working. The console was sophisticated, more complex than anything he had ever seen. But it didn't matter. He had faced far more complicated systems back on Earth. His hands moved with practiced precision, bypassing the first few security layers and gaining access to the reactor's core. This was it. With one final command, Ethan triggered the reactor's shutdown sequence. A low hum filled the room as the reactor's power began to stabilize, its energy source flickering and slowly beginning to fail. If this worked, the entire ship would be rendered useless. The general and his forces had no idea what was coming. They thought they controlled everything. But Ethan had a different idea. And now, the ship was his to break. The countdown began. The Apocalypse-class dreadnought was about to fall. The escape plan. The reactor's hum began to waver, its power output fluctuating as Ethan's fingers worked furiously at the console. The alien ship, which had seemed so invincible moments ago, now trembled under his touch. The countdown in his mind was starting, not in seconds, but in mere moments. If the reactor shut down completely, the ship's weaponry would be disabled, its engines crippled. The general's pride would collapse in a heartbeat. But it was risky, too risky. Ethan pulled his hand away from the console just as the first alarm rang. A sharp, shrill tone sliced through the silence, followed by an automated voice. Warning. Reactor system unstable. Containment breach imminent. Lockdown sequence activated. He didn't waste a second. The alarm was the signal he needed. The entire ship would be on high alert now, and reinforcements would flood the corridors to contain the issue. Ethan needed to leave before the alien forces realized what was truly happening. The walls around him seemed to close in. The low rumble of the reactor's instability added an eerie sense of urgency to the already charged atmosphere. Ethan had no time to think. The escape wasn't going to be a smooth operation anymore. It had just become a sprint. He turned quickly, slipping through a narrow maintenance hatch that led to the lower levels of the ship. The hallways ahead were dimly lit, and the silence was broken only by the sound of his boots against the metal floors. Time was against him now. The alien forces were likely already tracking the systems, rushing to restore order. But Ethan had learned something crucial. Humans had one weapon the aliens didn't: adaptability. He had been in tight spots before, and he knew how to use the ship's layout to his advantage. He didn't need to fight all the guards. He needed to get to the escape pods, and fast. His mind was laser-focused. As he rounded a corner, his eyes darted to a row of access doors, leading to what appeared to be the lower security section of the ship. He pushed through one of the doors, slipping into a small, dimly lit room filled with discarded tools and maintenance equipment. It was just a temporary refuge, nothing more than a moment to catch his breath. A flash of movement outside the window caught his attention. 2 alien soldiers patrolled the hallway. They didn't see him. He waited, holding his breath, his heart racing. The soldiers walked past, oblivious to his presence. This was it, his chance to move forward. Ethan stepped back into the hallway, slipping past the soldiers, moving with careful precision. The alarms were growing louder, now joined by the sound of clanging doors and the heavy stomp of boots echoing through the hall. The ship was in full lockdown mode, and he knew it would only be a matter of time before the general realized the severity of the situation. He pressed on, weaving through the network of corridors, heading toward the escape pods. But as he rounded another corner, something unexpected happened. The general's voice came over the intercom. "We have a problem," the voice crackled. "A human has disabled the reactor. All security units are to converge on escape pod Bay 7. Do not allow any unauthorized personnel to leave." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. They knew where he was. The walls, once silent, were now filled with the unmistakable sound of footsteps in every direction. The alien soldiers were closing in. He had no choice. He had to move faster, think faster. Every moment mattered now. He pushed forward, faster now, ignoring the growing panic in his chest. Escape pod Bay 7 wasn't far. The ship's security doors, once meant to keep enemies out, now seemed like they might trap him in. His heart pounded harder with each step. He was almost there. As he reached the final hallway leading to the pods, he saw the flashing lights ahead. Guards, blocking his only route. The 2 soldiers in front of him were already moving toward the pod bay, unaware of his presence. But that wouldn't last for long. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device he'd stolen earlier from one of the soldiers. It was a jamming tool, a simple piece of alien technology he had hacked into and modified during his time on the ship. He activated it, and the lights flickered overhead. A second later, the guards' weapons suddenly powered down. The soldiers froze, bewildered. A chance. In a split second, Ethan bolted toward them, moving like lightning. He tackled the first soldier, using his momentum to send the alien crashing against the wall. Before the second soldier could react, Ethan spun around, disarming them with a quick, calculated movement. The guards were down. No shots fired, no alarm raised. Ethan had no time to savor the victory. He quickly sprinted toward the escape pods, entering the access code he had memorized earlier from the alien soldiers' communication logs. The pod bay doors hissed open. He was in. The pod itself was a small, sleek vessel designed for quick launches in case of emergency evacuations. The interior was minimal, but to Ethan, it felt like freedom. He strapped himself in, the automatic launch sequence beginning the moment he entered the cockpit. But just before the countdown, a final thought struck him. What if the aliens had one last trick up their sleeve? He quickly glanced at the control panel. A flashing warning light appeared, an automatic fail-safe mechanism that would lock the pod's launch if it detected unauthorized access. Ethan gritted his teeth. He hadn't anticipated this. His fingers flew over the console, using the alien tech to bypass the fail-safe. But the countdown had already begun. His heart raced as the seconds ticked down. He had no choice but to override the system entirely. Finally, with one final push, the pod's engines roared to life. Ethan shot forward, the pressure pushing him into the seat as the pod shot out of the bay and into space. As he ascended, the distant glow of the Apocalypse-class dreadnought grew smaller, fading into the blackness of space. The ship, the alien's greatest weapon, was no longer a threat. He had done it. He had escaped. But this victory wasn't just for him. It was for every human who had ever been underestimated, every individual who had ever been told they were too small, too weak, or too insignificant to make a difference. Ethan stared into the endless expanse of space, knowing the fight wasn't over. The aliens would come after him, after humanity. But that was fine. He had already shown them one thing: humans don't break. They never will. And next time, the aliens would know exactly what they were up against. Humanity's fury had only just begun. The final confrontation and victory. As the escape pod hurtled away from the Apocalypse-class dreadnought, the cold void of space stretched endlessly before Ethan. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but there was no time to rest. The vast expanse of the galaxy awaited, but the battle was far from over. The dreadnought was just one part of a far larger alien empire, and its loss would no doubt draw the full wrath of the invaders. Ethan checked his pod sensors. There were no immediate signs of pursuit. His escape had been clean, but he knew the general wouldn't let this slide. The loss of a ship like the Apocalypse class was unforgivable. The alien forces would come looking for him, but right now, he had a moment to gather his thoughts. The pod's AI flickered to life. A soft, robotic voice broke the silence. Warning: tracking devices online. Unauthorized escape detected. Course deviation initiated. Ethan cursed under his breath. He should have known. Of course, the aliens had a failsafe. No system was perfect, and this ship wasn't going to let him get away that easily. The tracking device embedded in the pod was activated. They would find him, no matter how far he tried to run. His fingers raced across the controls as he manually disabled the tracking system. It was a risky move. Disabling the signal would send the pod into a state of autopilot, and he'd lose control over its trajectory for a brief moment. But he had no choice. He needed to buy more time. And to do that, he had to make sure the aliens couldn't trace him back to Earth. The AI warned him again, but this time Ethan ignored it. He toggled the emergency bypass, overriding the pod's emergency protocols. The screen flickered, and then it went black for a moment. The tracking device was offline. System reset complete. The pod's AI finally spoke. Tracking signal disabled. Preparing course deviation. Ethan took a deep breath, leaning back in his seat. The tension in his body slowly relaxed as he looked at the star-filled sky before him. For the first time since his capture, he felt like he was truly free. But that freedom came with a price. The aliens would never stop hunting him. They would send fleets to Earth. They would unleash their fury. But one thing was certain: Ethan was not alone. He closed his eyes, remembering the humans he had left behind. His friends, his family, the countless souls on Earth who had no idea how close they were to being annihilated. Ethan's resolve hardened. The next chapter of this fight wouldn't be his alone. He wasn't just escaping anymore. He was preparing for war. The escape pod lurched suddenly as it moved into a deeper section of space. Ethan checked the navigation system again. He wasn't just floating aimlessly. The pod had auto-corrected its course, heading toward an asteroid field. Its sensors programmed to keep him hidden for now. The deep space routes were treacherous, and the alien forces would never expect him to hide there. He had bought himself some breathing room. But Ethan knew that time was running out. He couldn't stay in hiding forever. The war against the alien empire was just beginning. As he prepared for the inevitable confrontation, a voice inside his mind urged him to stay focused. He wasn't done yet. He activated the pod's communication system and began working on a message. He would need allies. Earth needed to be warned, and the other alien races, the ones who had never seen humanity's strength, would need to be rallied. The message he sent out was simple, but it was enough to ignite the first spark of hope. The human race does not kneel. We fight. The aliens have underestimated us, but we will not be silenced. Prepare for the coming storm. The message was encrypted and sent to multiple deep space channels, hoping that some of it would reach the right ears, any allies who would listen. Ethan knew that the fight would be long, and it would be brutal. The aliens had vast resources, but humanity had something they didn't: resilience. As he sat back in the seat, the stars flashing outside the window, Ethan couldn't help but smile. The general had believed the human mechanic was nothing more than a tool, a cog in the machine. But Ethan had proven that a single human could break the most powerful machine in the galaxy. He had turned the tables, destroyed the alien ship, and escaped their grasp. But the best part, he had given humanity something the aliens could never take away: hope. With that, the pod began its final course deviation, heading toward Earth. Ethan had set in motion a chain of events that would shape the future of the galaxy. The aliens had their fury, but humanity had something far more powerful, and the fight for survival had only just begun. In the distance, through the vast void of space, Earth beckoned, a planet on the brink of war, but one ready to rise against its oppressors. The story of humanity's resilience, bravery, and ultimate victory was far from over.